welcome to another deep dive. This is where we take that stack of sources you've shared with us, the articles, the research, your notes, and plunge in to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge. Today, we're tackling a topic that's, well, foundational to your world. The fascinating history of the innovators behind the computer and the internet.
And this isn't just a timeline of inventions, is it? Your sources really explore who these people were, the teams they built, the conflicts they faced, and, the often surprising ways ideas merged from completely different places. It's really the human story woven into the technology.
Absolutely. We want to give you that shortcut to being truly well-informed about the origins of the digital age, finding those unexpected facts, and the connections that make the history feel alive.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this. And the story begins much earlier than you might initially guess. We're talking mechanical dreams, before anything electronic.
That's right. Before chips and code, people were grappling with the fundamental idea of automating calculation. Take Charles Babbage in the 1830s. What drove him? Well, he wanted to build machines to execute calculations by steam, mostly to eliminate the errors that were just rampant in logarithm tables, the ones calculated by hand.
The drudgery. Imagine.
I mean, of the sheer human drudgery he was trying to escape.
Exactly. And he wasn't the absolute first to mechanize calculation. I think Blaise Pascal had a mechanical calculator way back in the 1640s.
He did, yeah. But Babbage's ambition was on a whole other level. He designed the difference engine first for tabulating polynomials, but his truly visionary concept was the analytical engine, conceived around 1834.
The analytical engine, right.
Well,
That's the one people say was like 100 years ahead of its time.
Yeah, easily. It was designed to be a general-purpose programmable computer, and part of what made it so revolutionary was Babbage's willingness to sort of borrow ideas from seemingly unrelated fields.
His combining faculty, I think one of his collaborators called it.
Exactly. He incorporated concepts like the punched cards Joseph Marie Jacquard had invented decades earlier, back in 1801, to control complex patterns on looms.
Weaving, right.
Yeah, for weaving. Babbage saw how those same cards could program his analytical engine. It was quite a leap.
And that brings us to Ada Lovelace. What a character.
Oh, absolutely.
Daughter of Lord Byron, raised by a fiercely mathematical mother, mentored by the scientist Mary Somerville. She met Babbage in Somerville's salons.
Yeah, she returned to math and, the sources suggest, developed this strong sense of her own natural genius. She actually offered to partner with Babbage, though maybe the terms she proposed were a bit ambitious.
Demanding, maybe?
Possibly. Babbage ultimately declined that formal partnership, but their friendship and intellectual collaboration definitely thrived. He called her the enchantress of numbers and my dear and much admired interpreter.
And what did she interpret so uniquely? What was her big insight?
Well, her great insight was grasping that the analytical engine's potential went far beyond just crunching numbers. Because it was reprogrammable, it could theoretically process anything that could be represented symbolically, like music or images. She saw the machine's potential for broader manipulation of symbols, not just calculation.
That's crucial, isn't it? It wasn't just a faster calculator. Its whole purpose could change with new instructions.
Exactly. So right at the beginning, you see innovation stemming from this unique combination of disparate ideas, math, mechanics, weaving, symbolic logic, and the collaboration between brilliant, sometimes eccentric, individuals like Babbage and Lovelace. They were tackling the foundational concepts that would be needed, centuries later.
Which leads us eventually to the dawn of electronic computing, late 1930s, 40s. And here we find different kinds of personalities driving progress, like John Vincent Atanasoff.
Atanasoff's story is fascinating. Apparently, he conceived the core ideas for an electronic computer during a long drive one winter night in 1937. In his new Ford V8, no less.
Seriously?
Yeah. He was looking for a way to automate these complex calculations he needed to do.
And he made some interesting design choices, didn't he? Opting for cheaper capacitors for memory instead of just expensive vacuum tubes.
Right, which made the machine somewhat unwieldy, a bit clunky. He built a model and then a larger version, the Atanasoff Berry computer, or ABC, by 1942.
But it had issues.
It did. That machine had its limitations, particularly a punch card mechanism for output that, it never quite worked reliably. And then work paused when Atanasoff joined the Navy during the war, and crucially, his lawyer never actually filed for patents.
Oof. Okay, so meanwhile, another key figure was also intensely pursuing electronic calculation. John Marshall.
Mauchly. Yeah, he was a physicist from a background that encouraged sharing scientific ideas, kind of the gentleman scientist realm.
Huh.
He was known for being a showman, charismatic, creative in his teaching.
Use skateboards in class, apparently.
Things like that, yeah. He desperately wanted to automate calculations, especially for his weather research.
And he was looking at everything available.
Right. He was actively experimenting IBM punch card machines, but they were too slow. He played with vacuum tubes, saw them used in encryption machines and cosmic ray counters, and started building his own circuits. There was a strong competitive drive in him, too, a yearning to be the first to create an electronic computer.
Okay, so you have Atanasoff and Mauchly both working on this.
And these two worlds collided. Mauchly and Atanasoff met at a conference in December 1940. Atanasoff mentioned his electronic calculator project at Iowa State and, importantly, claimed it was cost-effective.
Ah, that would get Mauchly's attention.
Definitely, because Mauchly had estimated vacuum tube computers would be prohibitively expensive. So Mauchly visited Atanasoff for 4 days in June 1941.
And those ideas Mauchly encountered, combined with his own experiments and ambition, well, that contributed to the path towards ENIAC.
ENIAC, exactly. That was the machine Mauchly built with J. Presper Eckert.
Eckert, who was he?
Oh, Eckert was this brilliant, inventive young engineer from Philadelphia. Had a real knack for building things, radios, sound systems, and apparently dazzled people with his inventions from a young age.
So ENIAC.
Yeah.
It became operational in 45.
Fully operational, yeah. And its speed was just astounding for the era. It could solve a partial differential equation in under an hour, something that took Harvard's Mark I computer 80 hours.
Wow.
And they knew how to make it look impressive. For the public unveiling, they put ping pong balls over the neon indicator lights.
Ping pong balls.
Yeah. Jean Bartik, one of the programmers, described the lights flashing like a Las Vegas marquee. She said, "We had done what we set out to do. We had programmed the ENIAC."
And you mentioned Jean Bartik. It's vital to remember the women programmers, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely critical. At the University of Pennsylvania, where ENIAC was built, there were about 70 women doing calculations, and around 20 worked directly on programming and running the machine.
Wow, 70.
Yeah. Women like Adele Goldstein, who helped train programmers, described as quite stylish, cigarette dangling while lecturing, and Jean Bartik, who became a really key figure in early programming.
But ENIAC had a major limitation, right? Reprogramming it wasn't easy.
Not at all. Reprogramming it for a different task could take hours of manually changing wires and switches. And this is something the influential mathematician John von Neumann noticed when he visited.
Ah, von Neumann. Yeah, Hungarian mathematician, very influential.
Right. He worked at the Institute for Advanced Study, connections to Alan Turing. He was impressed by ENIAC's speed, but immediately saw the drawback of its fixed programming. His visit really stimulated discussions already underway among the ENIAC team about a stored program computer.
Stored program, meaning the instructions are in memory, like the data.
Exactly, so you don't have to rewire the whole thing. And von Neumann's approach to disseminating these ideas caused quite a stir.
How so?
Well, he started collecting and summarizing the ideas being discussed for the successor machine, EDBS, in his famous draft report on the EDBC in June 1945. He apparently believed that ideas generated by a group weren't really attributable to specific individuals.
Which didn't sit well with Eckert.
Not really. Eckert reportedly questioned that idea, but the consequence was significant. Von Neumann's report got distributed widely and became what's called a prior publication.
Meaning?
Meaning later, when Mauchly and Eckert tried to patent the stored program concepts they had developed, that report was used to argue the ideas were already in the public domain. Their patents were eventually invalidated in court, partly based on the Atanasoff connection, too.
Wow. So that really highlights this tension, doesn't it? The push and pull between sharing ideas freely, like the early internet folks did, versus protecting intellectual property for profit.
Exactly. That tension runs right through the whole history. Eckert later reflected that while Atanasoff may have won a point in court, the Eckert-Mauchly team had the ability to synthesize ideas, build a team, and crucially, build the first general-purpose electronic computer, laying the groundwork for what came next.
We should also definitely mention Grace Hopper in this era. She worked with Howard Aiken on the Mark I computer at Harvard.
Admiral Grace Hopper, yeah, what a legend.
And Aiken assigned her a monumental task, right?
Right.
Read the first computer programming manual.
For the Mark I, a 500-page document. When she apparently balked, he famously told her, "Well, you're in the Navy now. You're going to write one."
Love it. And she, like Lovelace, really understood the power of reprogrammability, didn't she? Saw the connection back to Babbage.
She absolutely did. And her perspective often emphasized the role of creative individual inventors, which was kind of a contrast to the corporate view, like IBM's, which tended to highlight teams and institutions.
It shows that innovation isn't just one thing. It's this interplay between individual vision and collaborative effort.
Precisely. Which brings us to the next huge leap. The transistor and the rise of solid-state technology, starting in the late 1940s. And this story is centered at Bell Labs.
Bell Labs,
Yeah.
designed as an innovation engine, right? Bringing together theorists, scientists, engineers, all in one place.
Yeah, a great example of how physical proximity and collaboration can spark breakthroughs. But, large institutions also have their bureaucracies and challenges.
True. So the transistor, 1947.
Invented there in 1947 by what they called the solid-state team. This included William Shockley, the brilliant but difficult supervisor and theoretician.
Difficult how?
Well, we'll get to that. Then there was John Bardeen, a quiet quantum theory expert who collaborated well, and Walter Brattain, the experimentalist. The president of Bell Labs, Mervyn Kelly, had consciously assembled a team with no losers, balancing different strengths.
And that physical proximity was key, you said.
Absolutely. Bardeen worked right in Brattain's lab space, which enabled constant back-and-forth brainstorming. They demonstrated the first working transistor to their supervisors.
But Shockley's personality.
Yeah, that became a significant challenge. He could be paranoid, competitive, even with his own team. Famously made someone take a lie detector test once.
Whoa.
Yeah. This led to disputes over credit and patent claims for the later, more practical junction transistor.
So infighting even then.
Right. When Brattain subtly indicated that he and Bardeen had contributed significantly to Shockley's concepts for that junction transistor, leadership had to intervene. Bardeen and Brattain were moved, so they no longer reported directly to Shockley.
Wow. This human drama behind the breakthroughs.
Always. But the transistor's impact was just undeniable. It started making technology personal.
The transistor radio.
Exactly. That was the first major example. It wasn't just the shared family appliance anymore. It was your device. You could take it anywhere.
And business leaders noticed this shift.
They did. Thomas Watson Jr., the head of IBM, saw these little radios and bought 100 of them, gave them to his executives, and basically said, we need to start using these transistors in our computers.
Smart move. So the transistor led directly to the microchip, the integrated circuit.
It did. Jack Kilby at Texas Instruments was instrumental here. He had the insight that you could put multiple electronic components, resistors, capacitors, transistors, onto a single piece of semiconductor material.
A chip.
A chip. His boss at TI gave him a challenge first. Just make a working capacitor and resistor on the same chip. Kilby did it, demonstrated his first integrated circuit concept in September 1958 on a silicon chip the size of a toothpick, apparently.
Tiny, but as often happens, someone else was working on similar ideas.
Yep, parallel development. Robert Noyce at Fairchild Semiconductor. Noyce was this charismatic figure, an Iowa Golden Boy MIT doctorate. He was actually recruited by Shockley earlier. Noyce said it was like picking up the phone and talking to God. Noyce was one of the traitorous 8 who famously left Shockley Semiconductor to form Fairchild.
Right, that group.
And Noyce developed something called the planar process, which was absolutely crucial.
How crucial.
Well, while Kilby had the concept of putting components on a chip, Noyce developed the practical method for manufacturing them on a mass scale, using printed metal lines for connections right on the chip surface.
Manufacturability.
Exactly. Fairchild's patent application in July 1959, focusing on this manufacturing process, came after TI's broader concept patent filed earlier that year. It eventually led to cross-licensing deals.
So Kilby gets credit for the initial concept, but Noyce for the practical way to actually make them work reliably and en masse.
That's a pretty good summary, yeah. Again, you see different angles on innovation and intellectual property right at the start of a foundational technology.
This leads straight into the explosion of the Silicon Valley ecosystem, doesn't it?
It really does. Demand from government contracts, huge ones like the Apollo guidance computer and the Minuteman missile, drove down chip prices dramatically.
Which created the opening for commercial stuff.
Exactly. Pat Haggerty at Texas Instruments saw this opportunity, just like Watson saw the transistor radio. Haggerty looked for a consumer application for these new microchips and landed on pocket calculators.
Pocket calculators.
Right.
And the environment in Silicon Valley itself was becoming unique.
Oh, yeah. You had Gordon Moore, also part of that traitorous 8, co-founding Intel in 1968 with Robert Noyce and Andy Grove.
Grove, known for being quite intense.
Very. Grove was initially kind of appalled by Noyce's more laid-back management style, but he came to respect his leadership.
And Noyce's style was different.
Very different. He deliberately avoided strict hierarchy, empowered employees, put responsibilities squarely on them, famously said, "It's your ass." He really detested the older, more rigid corporate structures back east. Aloof sometimes, but charming.
And Moore, of course, gave us Moore's Law.
Moore's Law. The observation that the number of transistors on a chip seemed to double roughly every year or two, the time frame shifted a bit over time. It became this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, charting the relentless pace of innovation and, frankly, wealth creation in the industry.
And fueling all this growth was something equally transformative happening alongside the tech venture capital.
Yes. Arthur Rock, who helped the Traitorous Eight get funding to form Fairchild, was critical here. He didn't just invest in companies like Intel putting in $300 for a 20% stake early on. He helped institutionalize the practice of venture capital itself.
So VC wasn't totally new,
Yeah.
but Rock made it bigger, more structured.
Yeah, he and others were instrumental in providing the necessary funding and structure for startups to scale incredibly rapidly. It really defined the ecosystem of Silicon Valley. The Valley became this fascinating blend of cultures. You had the pocket protector engineers, the entrepreneurs like at Intel or Atari later, MIT-style hackers who loved hands-on tinkering, the phone freaks.
And counterculture, too.
Definitely. You had idealists, community organizers wanting to use tech for progressive goals. And Stuart Brand really embodied that connection between the techies and the hippies, the counterculture.
The whole Earth catalog guy.
That's him. He argued that the counterculture's skepticism of centralized authority provided a philosophical underpinning for the whole personal computer revolution. Organized the TRIPS Festival back in '66, his whole Earth catalog with its tagline, "Access to Tools," was hugely influential.
And he connected with the tech people directly.
Well, yeah. He visited Xerox PRC, profiled Alan Kay, and wrote about this shift towards technology becoming small and the personal.
Which leads us neatly to those early visions of interaction and personal computing in the 60s and 70s, especially Doug Engelbart.
Engelbart, yeah, he was profoundly influenced by Vannevar Bush's post-war essay, As We May Think, which described a theoretical personal information system, the MIMEX.
Bush, who we mentioned earlier regarding government funding.
Right. Engelbart served in the Navy, got an engineering degree, worked at a NASA Forerunner. Then he apparently had this life-altering moment where he felt he didn't have any more goals.
Wow.
That spurred him to dedicate his life to using technology to augment human intelligence.
Augment intelligence, not replace it.
Exactly. Human-computer symbiosis. He worked at Stanford Research Institute, SRI, which was involved in early AI research, and he showcased this vision dramatically in the mother of all demos in 1968.
That demo is legendary. What did he show?
Just incredible stuff for the time. Graphical displays, the mouse, which his team developed, hypertext linking, video conferencing, real-time collaborative editing. It was an astonishingly prescient look at interactive computing.
What was he like?
Sources describe him as eerily calm, speaking in a monotone, diffident yet warm. But he had difficulty getting funding sometimes.
And his focus wasn't on small personal machines.
Not really. His focus was on cramming maximum functions into his big online system, or NLS, for augmenting collective intelligence. He saw small personal computers as a totally different trip.
Interesting. So maybe that focus on complexity is why his direct influence on the PC revolution wasn't as immediate as someone like Alan Kay.
That's a good point. Engelbart was a hugely important theorist and visionary, but perhaps less successful as an innovator in terms of getting simple tools adopted quickly because he made things complex.
Which contrasts with Alan Kay.
Right. An MIT hacker from the Tech Model Railroad Club was also deeply influenced by Licklider's ideas on human-machine interaction. He saw Engelbart's demo and was totally energized by the concept.
And he ended up at Xerox PRC.
Xerox PRC, yeah. Legendary research center. Like Bell Labs, it brought together diverse, brilliant people. But PRC had this playful sensibility, partly from Kay and the MIT hacker influence. Kay described it as dealing lightning with both hands.
Huh. And he proposed the Dynabook.
Yeah, the Dynabook. A powerful personal computer the size of a notebook, envisioned specifically for children of all ages. He was inspired by Licklider's vision of a cybernetic meadow where tech would be a welcoming, creative space.
Did they build it?
They built the Alto as an interim step. The Alto had the graphical interface, the overlapping windows, the mouse, many core concepts, and Kay's driving principle was making technology simple, friendly, intuitive, keeping children in mind, he said.
A deliberate contrast to Engelbart's complexity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Engelbart wanted maximum functionality. Kay wanted intuitive simplicity for a personal device. And that difference was crucial in paving the way for the personal computer revolution.
Which leads us right into the mid-1970s, the explosion of personal computers, and crucially, the emergence of software as its own thing. And this story starts, surprisingly, far from Silicon Valley. Albuquerque, New Mexico.
That's where Ed Roberts, described as the world's ultimate hobbyist, ran a small electronics company called MITs. In April 1974, he got his hands on handwritten datasheets for Intel's brand new 8080 microprocessor.
The chip that really enabled the first PCs.
Exactly. And Roberts had this simple yet profound idea: use this computer on a chip to make a computer kit that hobbyists could build themselves. He created the Altair 8800.
A kid computer?
Yeah, it's a box of parts, basically. The January 1975 cover of Popular Electronics featured the Altair declaring, "Project Breakthrough! World's first mini-computer kit to rival commercial models. Altair 8800 save over $1,000. And underneath, the era of the computer in every home has arrived."
And people bought it.
Did they ever? The response was overwhelming. Orders poured in immediately, 400 in one day. They sold 5,000 kits really quickly. People were literally sending checks for a box of parts they had to solder together themselves. No screen, no keyboard initially, just switches and lights.
It's incredible. And two young guys saw that magazine cover.
Bill Gates and Paul Allen saw it in December 74 and had a different insight. They realized the real revolution wasn't just the hardware kit. The magic was in the software.
They weren't hardware guys.
No. We're not hardware gurus, Allen said. But they understood code. And their most important idea, arguably, was realizing you could create a software industry. They saw that the value would shift and the people writing the code would become key players, defining the market.
So they developed BASIC for the Altair.
Right away. They saw the Altair needed software to be useful. Paul Allen moved to Albuquerque in spring 1975 to work at Meets. His colleagues thought he was crazy leaving Honeywell. Gates stayed at Harvard for a bit longer.
Got in trouble for using too much computer time.
Famously got ad-boarded, for using the university's PDP-10 time to develop their BASIC interpreter. Their deal with Meets was clever. They licensed BASIC for $30 a copy, but crucially, they retained ownership and required Meets to use its best efforts to sublicense it to other hardware makers.
Setting the stage for later deals, like with IBM.
Exactly. Gates had this intense, relentless work ethic, pulling 36-hour coding sessions, sleeping in the office, but also a wild side. Allen described him driving his Porsche recklessly to let off steam, and their competitive chess games sometimes ended with the pieces just swept off the board.
Wow. Intense.
They'd had good training, though, working on DEC mini-computers, mentored by people like Steve "Slug" Russell, who created the early game Space War. They learned how to push machines, how to crash them, and Gates especially developed an uncanny ability to spot errors in code.
So the PC era was really launched by this recognition that software was key, driven by Gates and Allen.
You could definitely argue that. At the same time, on the West Coast, another iconic partnership was forming: Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs.
What was the job?
Wozniak was this quiet, brilliant engineer at HP working on calculators. He went to the first Homebrew Computer Club meeting in March 1975. Initially felt out of place, he said, until he saw the Altair.
And that sparked something.
It did. He was already building his own video terminal, and he suddenly realized he could use a microprocessor to put the computer inside the terminal. Integrate the computer, keyboard, screen, all into one unit.
The Apple-like concept.
The whole vision of a personal computer just popped into my head, he said. Sketched it out that night. And Jobs saw Wozniak's design and instantly recognized its potential as a product. He had the instinct for packaging, marketing, making technology user-friendly.
A perfect pairing, in a way.
Incredibly complementary. Wozniak designed the revolutionary hardware. Jobs figured out how to turn it into a business calling chip makers for free samples, showing off the prototype at Homebrew, selling the circuit boards.
They sold their stuff to fund it, right? Jobs' VW van.
Yep, Jobs sold his VW bus. Wozniak sold his fancy HP calculator. Wozniak summarized it perfectly. Every time I designed something great, Steve would find a way to make money for us.
Wozniak, the engineering genius. Jobs, the product visionary and marketer. Both essential.
Absolutely. But even with great hardware like the Apple I and later the Apple II, the personal computer needed a compelling reason for ordinary people, especially business folks, to buy it. It needed a killer app.
And that came in the form of the electronic spreadsheet, VisiCalc.
VisiCalc. Dan Bricklin was the visionary here. He was inspired by Doug Engelbart's demo, the graphical display, the mouse. He envisioned an electronic spreadsheet, sort of like a magic blackboard for numbers, while thinking about tedious calculations during a bike ride on Martha's Vineyard.
That's specific.
Yeah. His technical partner was Bob Frankston. They built a prototype on an Apple II and partnered with Dan Fylstra, who had started a software publishing company out of Harvard Business School, to turn it into a commercial product.
And they focused on usability.
Very much so. Their focus was on making VisiCalc a real product, not just a program. They used focus groups aimed for an intuitive user interface based on the principle of least surprise. Make it feel natural, predictable.
And VisiCalc was huge, wasn't it?
Oh, incredibly important. It showed that personal computers could be powerful tools for practical, real-world tasks, especially in business. It really drove sales of early machines like the Apple II. It was the killer app.
This era also saw the beginning of what became the interface wars. Apple's Macintosh launched with that famous 1984 Super Bowl ad.
Right, in 1984. The Mac really refined and popularized the graphical user interface, the GUI, and the mouse. It was a massive leap from the command line interfaces like DOS that most computers used, point and click instead of typing obscure commands.
And Microsoft was watching.
Oh yeah, Microsoft was actually a relatively small company compared to Apple in the early 80s, making most of its money writing software for the Apple II. Bill Gates had a pretty good relationship with Apple, visited Jobs regularly, and found out about the secret Macintosh project back in 1981.
So they developed Windows.
They developed Windows, their own take on the graphical interface. That transition from typing commands to clicking icons was pivotal in making computers accessible to a much wider audience. And the intense competition between Apple and Microsoft over operating systems and GUIs really shaped the landscape we still navigate today.
Okay, so while the PC revolution was taking shape, another, equally transformative development was quietly underway. The creation of the internet.
Right. And its origins are found in this unique partnership between the military, universities, and private corporations, what Eisenhower famously called the military-industrial complex. But here, maybe the military-industrial academic complex.
And the foundational figure here goes back even further. Vannevar Bush.
Vannevar Bush again. Engineer, dean at MIT. Built complex analog computers like the differential analyzer. He led U.S. wartime R&D during WWII, which saw an explosion of new tech. And his 1945 essay, Science, the Endless Frontier, was crucial.
Why was that essay so important?
It proposed large-scale government funding for basic scientific research at universities and companies, arguing it was vital for national progress and security. This vision led directly to the creation of institutions like the National Science Foundation, NSF, and the National Institutes of Health, NIH.
Got it. And another key player was J.C.R. Licklider.
Licklider, or Lick, as people called him. A psychologist, interestingly, who got fascinated by how humans and machines could work together, influenced by Norbert Wiener's ideas on cybernetics.
He worked on air defense systems.
Yeah, the SAGE air defense system. It required interactive computers, networks, graphical displays, really cutting-edge stuff. He helped design the human-machine interfaces and was thinking deeply about human-computer symbiosis.
And he ended up at ARPA.
He was recruited to head information processing at the Advanced Research Projects Agency, ARPA, in 1962. ARPA itself was spurred by the Sputnik launch in '57, and Licklider was brought in to fund visionary, high-risk research, putting Bush's ideas into action at a high level.
And Licklider had this grand vision.
He did, the Intergalactic Computer Network. He used that phrase, partly with wry humor, but to emphasize its potential scale. In a 1963 memo, he laid out the need for a network connecting computer centers across the country, and importantly, the need for a common language or convention for them to communicate.
Yeah, sounds like quite a character, too.
Yeah, known for his wit, for scouting creativity. His work, including projects on time-sharing and real-time interactivity, was foundational for thinking about computers not just as calculators, but as communication devices.
So who actually built the network?
A lot of the practical management fell to Larry Roberts. He was recruited to ARPA. Apparently, somewhat reluctantly, Taylor sort of blackmailed him into it. Roberts was known for his decisive analytical approach. Managed research contracts during the day, worked intensely on network design at night.
And he presented the plan for ARPANET.
Yeah, in 1967, at a meeting of the researchers ARPA was funding, they ultimately chose a decentralized web-like architecture, partly because it was seen as more survivable. If one node was knocked out, data could route around it.
It's survivable for military reasons, but also good for collaboration.
Exactly. That decentralized design reflected both military needs and academic values of collegiality and open exchange. It could route around damage and route around centralized control.
And the key technology was packet switching.
Packet switching was crucial. And interestingly, it was developed independently by two different people around the same time. Paul Barron at the Rand Corporation developed the concept in the early 60s for a survivable military communication network, breaking messages into message units. AT&T initially dismissed his ideas.
And the other person.
Donald Davies at the British National Physical Laboratory. He developed similar concepts, partly after learning about time-sharing at MIT, and he actually coined the term packets. The British Post Office was also resistant at first.
But Larry Roberts embraced it.
Yes. Roberts learned about Barron's and Davies' work and adopted the concept and Davies' term packet. This independent invention and ARPA's adoption of packet switching were absolutely fundamental.
Who built the actual hardware, the nodes?
A company called Bolt, Beranek and Newman, BBN, based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, won the contract to build the network's nodes, the interface message processors, or IMPs. These were the ruggedized mini-computers that handled the packet switching.
And how did they figure out the rules, the protocols for how computers would talk over this network?
That's another great story of collaboration. It largely came out of what became known as the Network Working Group, essentially just a gaggle of graduate students from the various universities involved, including a guy named Steve Crocker from UCLA. They started meeting informally.
Grad students figuring it out.
Pretty much. After a particularly fun and productive meeting in Utah in April 1969, they realized they needed to actually write things down systematically.
And that led to the RFCs.
Exactly. Steve Crocker famously volunteered to write the first document. He was worried about seeming too authoritative, writing it late at night in a bathroom to avoid waking his roommate, so he titled it Request for Comments, RFC 1, published in April 1969.
Request for comments. Humble beginnings.
Deliberately humble. And the RFC process became the standard for developing internet protocols and standards. It fostered this open source, collaborative, peer review approach. Vint Cerf later called it the Great Conversation.
There's that famous quote about it.
Right, from Dave Clark. We reject kings, presidents, and voting. We believe in rough consensus and running code. If your idea worked in practice, that mattered more than hierarchy.
So in late 1969, amidst all the other stuff happening.
Yeah, think about it. Late 1969, three incredible historic enterprises culminated almost simultaneously. Humans landed on the moon, the microprocessor was invented, and ARPA connected the first four computers in its network: UCLA, Stanford Research Institute, SRI, UC Santa Barbara, and the University of Utah.
Only the moon landing made the headlines, though.
Right. But ARPANET was arguably just as transformative in the long run.
Okay, so that was ARPANET. But how did we get the internet?
Yeah.
Connecting different networks.
That came next. Robert Kahn, who had worked on the IMPs at BBN, moved to ARPA in 1973. His mission was to figure out how to link ARPANET with other emerging packet networks, like radio and satellite networks. ARPA was also funding. He started calling the system for connecting these networks an internetwork, which got shortened to Internet.
And he worked with Vint Cerf.
Yes, Vint Cerf. Cerf was hearing impaired, often wore a coat and tie to stand out. He was a high school friend of Steve Crocker, worked in Leonard Kleinrock's group at UCLA on ARPANET measurement, and met Kahn there.
And together they invented TCP/IP.
Kahn and Cerf invented the core Internet protocols, TCP/IP, that allowed different kinds of networks to communicate reliably. Kahn's philosophy really reinforced that collaborative nature. Every contribution has to follow on to previous work. Everything is tied to everything else.
So the internet wasn't built by one company or government agency.
Not really. It was built by government funding, university research, contributions from firms like BBN, but mostly by this loosely knit cohort of academics and hackers who worked as peers and shared ideas openly. This resulted in a network fundamentally designed for distributed power and circumventing authority.
Licklider predicted this kind of world, didn't he?
He and Bob Taylor wrote a paper back in 1968, The Computer as a Communication Device, that was incredibly prescient. They predicted a world where people would connect based on shared interests, not just geography, and have free access to information where the whole world of information will be open.
Amazing foresight.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't instantly open to everyone, right?
No, definitely not. It's important to remember that for its first decade or so, the internet was primarily a gated community for researchers and academics with government connections. It really took another 10 years into the early 90s for ordinary home users to start getting access easily.
And making that access easy and appealing for the mass market, that was the critical step that ushered in the era of the World Wide Web and mainstream online communities.
Absolutely. Which brings us to Tim Berners-Lee at CERN, the European Particle Physics Lab.
He developed the World Wide Web. What was his core idea?
It was actually quite simple conceptually. Any information anywhere linked together. He built on existing concepts like hypertext, which Engelbart and others had worked on, and used the existing internet infrastructure.
And his initial vision was even more collaborative.
Yeah, he really wanted users to be able to easily edit and contribute to web pages, making it a two-way medium. He built the first browser, but it only worked on sophisticated NeXT computers. So he recruited an intern, Nicola Pello, to build a simpler text-only browser that would work on almost any machine.
Did he realize how big it would become?
He later said he had no idea that people would put literally everything on it. He just wanted to make it possible for people to share information easily. He deliberately didn't patent it, wanted it to be open.
But the web needed a better browser to really take off, right? Something graphical.
Exactly. That's where Mark Andreessen and the team at NCSA, the National Center for Supercomputing Applications at the University of Illinois, come in with Mosaic.
Mosaic, the first really popular graphical browser.
Yeah. Developed partly with funding from the Gore Act, interestingly. Mosaic was relatively easy to install and, crucially, could display images in line with text, not just in separate windows. Andreessen's focus was really on making the browser visually appealing, enabling rich media for eye-catching pages.
Which was maybe a bit different from Berners-Lee's focus on collaboration.
It was. Berners-Lee was apparently a bit disappointed that the focus shifted towards presentation rather than collaborative editing tools, but Andreessen's emphasis on running code and customer service impressed Berners-Lee, and that user-friendly graphical experience was absolutely essential for attracting a mass audience.
So Mosaic really kicked things into high gear.
Oh, yeah. Launched in 1993, it helped the web achieve what people called orbital velocity. The number of web servers exploded from maybe 50 to over 500 in just a year. Andreessen later co-founded Netscape, building on Mosaic's success.
And parallel to the web, earlier forms of online communities had been developing for years, right?
Definitely. You had bulletin board systems, BBSs, starting way back in 1978. Ward Christensen and Randy Suze created the first one during a Chicago blizzard, allowing hackers and hobbyists to dial in with their modems and leave messages on electronic forums.
And Usenet.
Usenet started around 1979, developed by students at Duke and UNC. It hosted threaded discussion groups, called newsgroups, initially passed around between university computers before being fully integrated with the internet.
And modems got easier to use.
That was key. The Hayes Smart Modem in 1981 made it significantly easier for regular home users to connect their computers to phone lines and dial into BBSs, Usenet, and early commercial online services.
Like CompuServe.
CompuServe was a big one. The Source was another early one, though apparently run a bit chaotically by its founder Bill von Meister. And then there was QuantumLink, or Q-Link, which was specifically for Commodore computer users.
Ah, Q-Link. That leads to AOL, doesn't it?
It does. Q-Link was run by Jim Timsey and Steve Case. Kimsey was this tenacious manager with a military background, brought in to turn around the struggling parent company. Case came from marketing, saw the huge potential in connecting people online, creating an electronic frontier.
And they focused on Commodore users first.
Yeah, but when growth plateaued, Case was absolutely relentless in pursuing partnerships to expand to other platforms like Apple and PC. The story goes he practically lived at Apple HQ until he got a deal.
Huh. The Steve held hostage sign.
Right. Q-Link was renamed America Online, AOL, in 1991. They focused intensely on ease of use, simple interface, curated content, chat rooms, and marketing, famously blanketing the country with free trial discs and that iconic You've Got Mail notification.
AOL showed there was a huge market for making online access simple and appealing, even if it was a more closed, walled garden compared to the open web.
Exactly. They brought millions of people online for the first time.
Okay, so the web is exploding, millions are coming online.
Yeah.
But finding stuff is getting harder.
Precisely. As the web grew exponentially, the challenge shifted. How do you find relevant information within this vast, chaotic, interconnected space? This led to the next big wave of innovation. search engines, and tools for collaborative content.
Enter Lori Page and Sergey Brin, Stanford PhD students.
Right. Page came from a computer science family, had this healthy disregard for the impossible mindset. He was interested in systems, connectivity, even thought about driverless cars way back then.
And he had this dream.
Yeah, apparently woke up with this idea about downloading and analyzing the structure of the entire web, specifically looking at how pages link to each other. The links to a page could indicate its importance. When a really great dream shows up, he said, grab it.
And Brin.
Brin was a mathematician born in Moscow, had a bit of a rebellious attitude, inspired by people like Richard Feynman, who bridged art and science. He was outgoing, charming, analytical, a good complement to the more reserved Page. They shared this sense of wonder.
Their first project wasn't a search engine.
No, their initial project, called Backrub in 1996, was just analyzing those backlinks to understand the web structure and maybe the value or authority of pages.
That's what they realized.
They quickly realized that an index of web pages ranked by their importance, determined by these backlinks, their PageRank algorithm, could be the foundation for a search engine far superior to existing ones like AltaVista. And that became Google.
And they got funding in that famous story.
Yeah, the classic Silicon Valley moment. Andreas Bechtelheim, a founder of Sun Microsystems, saw their demo on a friend's porch in 1998. He immediately got it, called it the single best idea in years, and wrote them a $100,000 check right then and there, payable to Google Inc., even though they hadn't officially incorporated or opened a bank account yet.
Incredible. And their early focus was just better search.
Pretty much. Build a genuinely valuable service, deliver the most relevant results, keep the interface clean, minimal advertising initially. They grew massively through word of mouth because it just worked better.
The internet also enabled new ways for individuals to publish. Blogger.
Ev Williams grew up on a farm in Nebraska, loved publishing. He created Blogger in 1999 with the goal of push-button publishing for the people, making it super easy for anyone to create and share their thoughts online.
Democratizing publishing.
Totally. And Blogger quickly evolved into a community with commenting and linking between blogs. Williams realized he valued that community aspect as much as the publishing tool itself. He said, connecting into a community is one of the basic desires that drive the digital world. Google bought Blogger in 2003.
And another key tool for collaborative creation was the wiki.
The wiki, developed by Ward Cunningham. He found existing tools for creating linked web pages, like Apple's HyperCard, a bit cumbersome. So he built something simpler around 1995. You could create a link to a new page just by typing its name in a specific format, like camel case. He called it WikiWikiWeb, using the Hawaiian word for quick.
Quick web pages.
Yeah. His online version used simple code to create a content management system where multiple users could easily contribute and edit pages. He first used it for a repository of software design patterns. He described it as casual, like email conversation as possible, very low barrier to entry.
And this idea was picked up by Jimmy Wales for
Wikipedia. Jimmy Wales grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, influenced by the space program's optimism. He loved encyclopedias like the World Book, but was frustrated by how quickly they became outdated. He joked he started as a kid revising the encyclopedia by stickering.
Huh. You ran some early web ventures.
Yeah, including one called Beaumise, sometimes described as a guy-oriented search engine with pictures of women. But through that, he saw the power of user-generated content. He was also impressed by Eric Raymond's essay, The Cathedral and the Bazaar, which argued that open collaborative development, the bazaar, could outperform traditional top-down methods, the cathedral.
So he tried an online encyclopedia.
First, he launched Nupedia in 2000. It was meant to be a free online encyclopedia written by volunteer experts using a rigorous peer review process. He hired Larry Sanger, a philosophy student, to manage it, but Nupedia's top-down cathedral-like model was just too slow. Very few articles got published.
Then the wiki idea came up.
Exactly. In early 2001, the idea of using wiki software for a more open, collaborative encyclopedia emerged. There's some debate about who exactly suggested it first, but Sanger championed the idea to Wales, arguing a wiki could enable the rapid, bazaar-style contribution Nupedia lacked. Wales was convinced.
And Wikipedia launched.
Wikipedia launched in January 2001 using wiki software. And well, the rest is history. Google, Blogger, Wikipedia, they all represent this incredible power of harnessing the internet's open, distributed nature for information discovery, publishing, and collaborative knowledge creation, building on those founding principles.
Okay, so that brings us towards the present. Let's briefly touch on artificial intelligence. There's been excitement and maybe some hype about AI for decades, right? Back to the 50s.
Oh yeah, recurring waves of excitement and sometimes AI winters when progress slowed. You get these breathless reports like about the perceptron back in 1958.
IBM has provided some high-profile examples of AI milestones. Deep Blue.
Deep Blue beating Garry Kasparov in chess in 1997, that was a huge moment. But Deep Blue won primarily through sheer brute force computation, evaluating hundreds of millions of chess positions per second. Not really what most people consider human-like thinking or intuition.
Kasparov wasn't impressed with its intelligence.
No, he famously said it was only intelligent the way your programmable alarm clock is intelligent. Harsh, maybe, but highlighting the difference between calculation and cognition.
Then later, IBM's Watson on Jeopardy.
Watson winning Jeopardy in 2011. That was different, showcasing impressive natural language processing, understanding nuanced questions, searching vast data incredibly quickly. It definitely energized the AI community again. IBM CEO talked about awakening the community.
But still, maybe not human-like AI.
Right. Still generally considered narrow AI, incredibly powerful at specific tasks, but not the general adaptable intelligence of humans. These examples really highlight the difference between brute force computation or specialized AI versus that broader quest for artificial general intelligence.
And it brings us back to that alternative idea.
Augmented intelligence, or human-computer symbiosis, Licklider's vision from the 60s.
And history seems to suggest that combining human intelligence, creativity, intuition with the speed and data processing power of computers has often been more fruitful, more impactful so far than trying to create machines that think entirely on their own.
I think that's fair to say. It's been about building better tools for humans, amplifying our capabilities.
Which circles right back to the very beginning, doesn't it? To Ada Lovelace.
Exactly. Her unique ability to connect the logical world of mathematics with imagination, with the potential for symbolic manipulation beyond just numbers, that blend of the analytical and the creative.
Steve Jobs talked about this explicitly, didn't he? About Apple's DNA.
He did. He famously said Apple's core strength, its DNA, is technology married with liberal arts, married with the humanities, that yields us the result that makes our hearts sing. He even used to show a slide with two street signs, liberal arts and technology. Apple lived at the intersection.
So the idea is that real innovation often happens there, at that intersection.
And it suggests that, yeah, that the most profound innovations often happen where these different domains meet. Future breakthroughs may well come from individuals and teams who can bridge beauty and engineering, humanity and technology, poetry and processors. The modern spiritual heirs of Ada Lovelace, you could say, who approach the digital world with both deep technical skill and that crucial, rebellious sense of wonder.
Wow, what an incredible journey we've traced today. From, Babbage's mechanical gears and Lovelace's visionary notes, all the way to the global network connecting billions. It's definitely not just a dry history book.
Not at all. It's a saga of fascinating people, competing ideas, unexpected collaborations, breakthroughs, setbacks, and these recurring themes just keep popping up.
Yeah. What are some of those key patterns you see?
Well, the spark that comes from bringing diverse perspectives together, often in close physical proximity, like at Bell Labs or P-Arc. The importance of both individual genius and team collaboration, you need both the Wozniaks and the Jobs. That ongoing tension between open sharing of knowledge, like the early internet RFCs, and protecting innovation for profit, like the patent battles.
And making things simple.
Absolutely critical. The necessity of making complex technology simple, intuitive, and useful enough for real humans to embrace K's focus, VisiCalc's usability, AOL's ease of use, Google's clean interface, that's often the key to adoption.
So all these threads, the calculating machines, the transistors, the chips, the PCs, the networks, the software, the web, the collaborative tools, they all weave together to create the digital fabric you interact with every single day.
Exactly. The device you're probably listening on right now, the way you get information, how you connect with friends or colleagues, it all has roots in these stories, these people, these decisions made decades ago.
It really puts things in perspective.
It does. So as you continue to navigate this ever-evolving digital landscape, maybe consider this. What new forms of creativity, connection, and innovation will emerge next, especially as technology continues to merge with the arts, the humanities, and just basic human ingenuity? And where in this rich ongoing history, this complex tapestry we've talked about, where will you find your next aha moment? What connections will you make?